Hello, Daisy Cakes. Let's talk about Immortality Inc. by Robert Sheckley. Why? Because I am Daisy Ex Machina, the drag queen detective who investigates all things speculative in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I picked Immortality Inc. from the nominees of the 1959 Hugo Awards as part of my Hugo series to find retro authors and books that have passed us by. The winning novel for 1959 was A Case of Conscience by James Blish, but I decided to read the Robert Sheckley book because, well, first I liked the blurb for Immortality Inc., but I also couldn't remember whether or not I had read him before. This novel eventually turned into the 1992 movie Freejack with Mick Jagger. Yes, you heard me, Mick Jagger. But first, who exactly was the author Robert Sheckley? Robert Sheckley was born in 1928 and died in 2005 at the age of 77. He was an Army veteran who served in Korea, but he left before the start of the Korean War. After his service, he went to college and then pretty soon started selling short stories to the science fiction pulps in the early 50s, so he is definitely a golden age writer. One of his short stories was turned into a very well-regarded Italian science fiction movie in 1965 called The 10th Victim, starring Marcello Mastroianni and Ursula Andress, who were huge stars back in the day. In 1980, he became the science fiction editor of Omni magazine, and I definitely subscribed to Omni during his tenure there. He's very well regarded in the science fiction community, and he's also written some mysteries and thrillers. He's collaborated with the likes of Roger Zelazny, Harlan Ellison, and Harry Harrison. He's also written novels in the Star Trek and Babylon 5 universe. But we're here to talk about Immortality Inc., which is Robert Sheckley's debut novel. It was first published in serialized form in Galaxy Science Fiction magazine. Immortality Inc. explores the concept of souls. Now, there are very few science fiction novels that I've read where the science focuses on souls. Apparently, in this future, science has discovered that there is a soul for some people. Not everyone has a soul, or at least one that survives death. Like only 1 in 1,000 people who die have a soul that moves on to the afterlife. Now, you can develop an everlasting soul through Eastern practices of meditation and yoga and whatnot, but that requires devoting a lifetime to that practice. But science has the answer. They've developed equipment that can make your soul immortal. However, it's a pretty expensive process, so only the rich can buy their way into the afterlife. Sheckley has a very dark sense of humor, and it peeks through here. Anyway, because the science part is related to souls, that means you can contact people who pass over to the other side through the spiritual switchboard. And a big business is you can buy someone's body and have your soul transferred into that body. Now, the cost of someone's body is to pay to have their soul turned immortal, so they get an immortal soul and the rich person gets their body. A zombie is not a brain-eating zombie, but someone whose body transfer doesn't quite go correctly and the soul isn't powering the body and the body slowly starts to decay. Anyway, these are all such interesting concepts, and I can't think of another novel where spirituality and religion has been stripped out and replaced with the concept of a soul kind of turned into cold hard science. Also, Sheckley explores how people who know for certain that their afterlife is guaranteed may not actually care about whether or not they live or actually welcome death. Anyway, the story itself is about a man from 1958 named Thomas Blaine, who is a very ordinary guy. He's an assistant yacht designer who pretty much doesn't do any design work. He just does administrative work at a local yacht business. Anyway, he's in a car accident and his soul is transferred to a body in the year 2110 as a PR stunt by the Rex Corporation. Tom originally was in the body of a slim, attractive man, and this body is shorter and squat and brutish. So Tom assumes the original inhabitant of this body was a brutish guy, and that prejudice kind of comes back later in the story, which is kind of funny yet disturbing. He's at first excited about the future and what he thinks the future holds, and we get a really fascinating glimpse into what someone from the 1950s might hope the future looks like. Let me read a quote directly. Today might be free atomic power, undersea farming, world peace, international birth control. This was before the pill. Interplanetary travel, free love, complete desegregation, a cure for all diseases, and a planned society in which men breathed deep the air of freedom. Unfortunately, there are some legal issues that prevents the Rex Corporation from going forward with their publicity campaign, much to the chagrin of Marie Thorne, the cold, hard woman in charge of PR. Tom ends up being in this questionable legal status in the future, and he has to make his own way without money, without connections, without any idea of how the world works and the dangers within. Like there are these body snatchers who steal living bodies to sell their bodies to rich people. He gets a call from the spiritual switchboard from a mysterious person in the afterlife. And then a zombie appears who's hunting him, and on it goes. I really thought this was a fascinating novel. It's kind of amazing that I don't recall reading concepts like this anywhere else. The only exception was a famous short story by Poul Anderson called The Martyr. It struck me as so similar that I looked up to see when The Martyr was written. Poul Anderson's short story was written in 1960, a year after Immortality Inc. So I wonder how much Anderson was inspired by Sheckley. The only issue to me really was that the plot wasn't very tight, not like how we read plots today. While there is a mystery running through the novel, the story kind of wanders away from it, and especially at the end, it feels like the story got very slow. But that doesn't stop me from heartily recommending Immortality Inc. by Robert Sheckley, just for the concepts it explores. And Sheckley is a really good writer, and the humor is really dark and subversive. If you can't tell, I really loved the novel, so I wasn't surprised that someone wanted to turn it into a movie. Okay, let's talk about Freejack, the movie adaptation from 1992. Now, on paper, it kind of looks amazing. It's based on this wonderful novel, Immortality Inc., where Robert Sheckley explores how science has proven that a soul exists and has turned the afterlife into a money-making business. It also had a really good cast. It starred Emilio Estevez, who made a name for himself with The Breakfast Club, but he didn't shy away from really edgy indie films like Repo Man. It also starred Rene Russo and Anthony Hopkins. Yes, Sir Anthony Hopkins of Hannibal Lecter fame. Plus, they got Mick Jagger to play one of the villains, Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones, and it was a perfect part for him because he didn't have to do any serious acting. He just had to ham it up as a villain. What could go wrong? Apparently, quite a lot went wrong because the movie sucks. Oh my gosh, it is practically unwatchable. The main thing that went wrong, at least from my point of view, was they didn't really look at the source material, or they threw it out the window. Almost nothing is recognizable between the movie and the book. Don't get me wrong, I am glad they paid Sheckley for the rights. Authors deserve to get paid for their work, and I'm not sure anyone would have guessed that Freejack was even vaguely inspired by Immortality Inc., but I'm glad Sheckley got his due. Freejack is about a race car driver named Alex Furlong from 1992 who dies in a car crash and wakes up 20 years later, not in a new body, in his own body. Apparently there's a time travel device that can snatch bodies from the past just before the moment they die. And then they sell these bodies to rich people, and these bodies are known as Freejacks. By the way, I'm going to give away some major spoilers to this movie, but you'll probably, if you watch the movie, guess where they're coming from a mile away, and I don't recommend you watch this movie anyway. So, this is the setup of the movie. Back in 1992, Alex had a fiancée named Julie. Now he wakes up 20 years later. Julie is still around. She looks almost exactly the same, except she has a different hairstyle. She's an executive in this corporation working directly under this CEO of the corporation, Ian McCandless. Surprise, surprise, Alex's body was jacked by McCandless because he's dying and is in love with Julie and thinks if he inhabits the body of her ex-fiancé, he can get together with Julie. Oh, and McCandless's soul is being held in the spiritual switchboard, waiting to jump into Alex's body. Spiritual switchboard. Yay, that's a term from Sheckley's novel, even though it's not used in any manner the way Sheckley used it. I will say this movie did point out one of the weaknesses of Immortality Inc. Freejack did give at least a reason why the person, Alex, was targeted from the past, because a rich guy wanted to win over a woman by taking over the body of her dead lover. In Immortality Inc., it always seemed odd that this great publicity stunt targeted this nobody from the past. It seemed a weak plot device to get a soul from the past into the future. But whatever. Freejack ends up being one big car chase because guess what? The main character is a race car driver. The bottom line is stay away from the movie Freejack, but check out the novel that inspired it, Immortality Inc. by Robert Sheckley. Have you ever seen a movie allegedly based on a book that ended up being unrecognizable from the source material? Let me know down in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.